What are subtle red flags at a job interview that say, working here would suck? When you're signing all the forms they give you and you're taking your time to read over every document so that you can fully understand what you're getting into, and people come in and start telling you that you don't need to read this and that just sign here and so on. I was working with an indie game studio as a remodeler, texture artist. It was just for fun and making contacts. The game we were working on started picking up traction and had studios looking to pick us up. The lead in the project immediately got together with an attorney and drafted up contracts. Not a problem. I got mine, but there wasn't a rush, and since I had to do regular work for bills, I kind of ignored it for a couple days. The lead and his attorney started bombarding me with emails telling me to sign it. I replied with, "After I read it, I'll let you know." I immediately got a phone call from the attorney assuring me it was all just standard stuff, and if I wanted to secure my position in the studio, I should just sign it. Red flags everywhere. So when I had time, I read it, and I'm glad I did. It stated that anything I worked on in my personal time, which I did a lot of as an artist, was their property, and I had no rights to even show it. If I left the studio for any reason, I couldn't work in the video games industry for a minimum of 12 months. Even though I was working for free, I was not allowed to take a paid position at any other game studio while working with them. The list went on. I told them I wasn't going to sign that, and if they pressed, I was leaving. They pressed, I left. Find later that the lead started the studio, hired people, then drained the accounts, sold the hardware, locked the doors, and never returned. Story 2. I interviewed for an independent contractor position at a piece rate. It's hard to predict just how much you're going to earn in a piece rate, so to attract me, the manager showed me some pay stubs from his guys. I noticed that, number 1, he could easily cherry-pick pay stubs to show my best guys' best weeks. All that tells me is that I'm likely to make less than what he's showing me, at least on average. Number 2, the pay stubs were obviously designed to be confusing. They were a full page and absolutely covered in data. It wanted me to be impressed by a dollar amount, obviously not accounting for costs which the contractor has to carry or taxes which the contractor has to deduct and pay. But he took them away before anyone could have deciphered what the pay period, piece rate, number of jobs, or KMS was. Number 3, he showed me other people pay stubs. What the f***? Another red flag is that they were desperate to hire because they didn't have enough contractors to deliver the work contracts they'd already sold. I had 2 guys from different offices call me after I declined the position who apparently still thought I was considering it. There were other red flags. They weren't going to fit in a short comment, but I really wasn't interested. Even the gigantic, gaudy, prominently displayed trophy in the guy's office turned me off. Office fantasy football, lol. He said, "We take fantasy football seriously around here." I said, "I can see that." An independent contractor assumes all kinds of expenses and risks, especially for a job involving equipment and property. I could have lost a lot of money working for them, or compromised my ability to continue working. I did tell them they needed to double the mileage allowance and offer incentives to get started, and asked about regular employment. They offered me a job going around fixing the piece rate guy's mistakes for a salary that would have me well below the poverty line. It was a Mickey Mouse outfit. They're still hiring. If they're that desperate, then it doesn't matter how much money you could get. Story 3. Jumping on the not-so-subtle train here, about a month ago I interviewed for a position to run the office of a lawn or landscape company in my town. When I arrived, in-person interview, I waited at the receptionist's desk. A man wheeled out of the office in his desk chair and said to the receptionist, "Got a resume or anything for this one?" Meaning me. He literally looked at my resume for the first time sitting in front of me. He then started asking questions, never introduced himself, no, "Hi, how are you? Thanks for coming in," etc. He interviewed me while I was sitting at the receptionist's desk, with the receptionist sitting there working. If she took a call, he just paused until she was through. He repeatedly referred to his landscape crew as "my Mexicans," and when I politely ended the interview, he said, "Well, if you want, you can call on Friday to ask if we want you back for a second interview." Bro, no. Story 4. I came in for a job interview at 7:30 p.m. The entire staff was still in the office. Should have known right then that 9 to 5 was not ever going to happen. One day I worked until 2:30 a.m. to finish up a big project. My boss said to me I could come in an hour later the next morning. Gee, thanks, bro. With my public transport or travel time, that gives me a solid 2 hours of sleep instead of just the 1. I just wanted to say that there are really good employers out there. Do not stand by being treated so poorly because you deserve to be treated with respect. For any employers reading this, here's a few examples of how to create a loyal, healthy employee base. The current employer puts family first. If there is an emergency at home, they tell you to handle that first. For example, when I was miscarrying, they told me, "I don't want to see you in the next 2 weeks at least. Take your time and give me a call when you feel ready to come back in, okay?" 9 to 5 means 9 to 5. If you have to leave early for something or come in later because of something, they expect you to take your own responsibility. They don't even check if you actually catch up to lost time, they just expect that you do. By doing so, you create that on the rare occasion that you do have to stay late to finish something, you do that without complaining, because it only happens incidentally and not structurally. It certainly isn't expected. In fact, they ask if you really have to stay late or if you just think you have to stay late. If you both give and take, you're much more likely to give back. They frequently and genuinely ask about your well-being, and then also follow that up. If you tell them your mother is unwell, they ask about her a week later. It's not lost in the abyss that is business. No, you feel seen and heard. You look stressed. Is there anything I can do? Do you want to go over your to-do list together and prioritize what needs done first? Things like this mean the world. One time they walked in and said, "Hey, my afternoon meeting got canceled. I know you have like 15 files that need checking, and I've seen how full your calendar is. Why don't you give me 4 and I'll make sure they get sent out today to lighten your load a little." They focus on little tokens of appreciation. A chocolate Easter bunny waiting on your desk at Easter. Last year, they hid 10 Easter eggs in every room. I found one hidden in the box of my crackers. They make sure your salary is paid before Christmas, even though you normally don't get paid before the 26th. They make sure every secretary gets flowers on Secretary Day. They bought us weird pens. Think bright neon color with dangly beads on top. Just because they thought it would brighten up our days. Like, it only costs a penny, but it makes your staff feel seen. When there's a heat wave, they treat us with popsicles. When it's holiday season, they randomly decide to close the office at noon on December 31st. If we have to earn it in the last couple of hours of this day, we're doing something wrong. So let's shut down for the day. Have a good one, guys. They do not tolerate gossip. We talk with each other, not about each other. They hire capable staff. People who are not putting in the work or effort do not last. They will ask us about people's progress, like, "What do you think about the new receptionist?" And we can answer frankly, even if our opinion is that they're not making enough progress, etc. They want to know what we think and they value our input. This creates a healthy work environment, with driven people who all have heart for the cause. Mistakes are human. We solve them together without smack talking about the person responsible. Of course, we all have our bad days, and it's okay to mope and murple here and there to your roommate, but we really try to keep that to an absolute minimum. I have a hard rule. I don't with extra hours unless I hold company stock. I don't sacrifice my own time for someone else's bottom line. But the first job sounds like a dream, though. Story 5. I had a job interview with 2 people asking questions. One of them brought questions to the wrong people. Things I found later. The person on the IT team who had been with the company longest had been there just under a year. Their turnover was higher than McDonald's, over 50% turnover annually. They had a goal to get it down to 40%. Bonuses only get paid 1 year after you've been there. For a full calendar year, that only starts counting on January 1st. If you get hired January 2nd, 2020, you wouldn't get your first bonus until 2022. There was no manager for the programmers. There was no director for the IT team. They had tracking software for every keystroke, idle time, programs you were active in. They would question idle time, which meant people on the phone with clients would be questioned often because their computers would be idle. There was a lot going wrong, but the interview slip-up wasn't enough to really give it away in time. Suffice it to say, they didn't meet their turnover reduction goal. Who has time to track keystrokes and idle time? I've heard of places doing this, and all I can think is, don't you have better things to do? Like actually work instead of micromanaging employees? Story 6. I once interviewed for a job wherein the interviewer actually directly told me that the job was extremely stressful, and they'd had a slew of new hires quit within a month or 2. The job was at a psychiatric hospital. I thanked her for being honest with me and said that I was not interested. As she was walking me out, she leaned in and said, "You're doing the right thing. Our last hire quit because he said he was having palpitations all the time here and was worried he would have a heart attack." About 3 years later at another company, I saw one of the women who had interviewed me. She worked in a totally different position in a totally different setting. She said that the other woman who had interviewed me, the one who gave me the warning, actually did suffer a heart attack. She survived, and she stopped working there. I was so thankful she warned me. Most interviewers wouldn't do that. Thinking more about that woman, obviously she was very stressed and she was having to cover work for that position that needed to be filled. She could have easily, and understandably, have gone into survival mode and thought, "You know what? Let's just hire her," meaning me, "and then at least I will have some relief for a month or 2 until this one quits too." But she didn't do that. She thought of my welfare, a stranger, over her own interests, and clearly she was suffering. I would have relocated for that job too. About 150 miles. She was aware of that. Maybe that played into her decision to warn me, maybe not. Either way, she was an extraordinary person. She sounds like she was a considerate person, but also it can be hard to train a new person. It requires a bit of extra time in the day to teach them the ropes. You put up with it because you know it's better to take more time in the short term to teach someone correctly so that they will be up to speed quickly. Even if her schedule was difficult, it might have been easier to deal with a hard schedule than train someone new every month. I know something less difficult, helping me reach my goals, How about considering hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel? Story 7. I don't think I've necessarily had any subtle flags. I had a lot of interviews over the past year, and some made themselves really obvious as to when it would be a bad idea to take a job. They also tend to be the employers that ghost you afterwards. There were always ones that wanted interviews in person as well, despite the majority of mine being remote. Memorable ones include a 10-minute interview where the person didn't ask any questions of value, one where the employer suggested I should take my mask off, didn't have a clue what he needed for a person to fill the position, and then made sexist comments about not wanting to hire a woman, that his daughter, who was my age, told him off because it was politically incorrect and how it was a lad's environment and couldn't be doing with changing his behavior. One where the door buzzer didn't work and only a passing employee managed to let me in as the interviewer hadn't given her number. During the interview, she said she'd just taken over all the aspects of the business and fired about 4 warehouse people without warning, as they weren't 100% occupied at all times, and just told him it was time to go. One who had a lot of negative reviews online as a retailer about how he cheated his customers. When I got there early and was preparing, a member of staff came out and knocked on my car to tell me to come in. They made me do a test that was essentially free labor, and the interviewer asked me terrible questions that didn't cover relevant experience, made sexist comments about how he didn't want to hire women who would just sit in the office and drink coffee all day. When I challenged him about the company's reputation, came up with conspiracy theories about competitors paying to ruin his business. He had fired someone that week for being an addict and someone else who came in trying to improve the business, as anyone who told him how to run it could F off. And that's only some of them. Story 8. Honestly, red flags you should look for. Number 1, if the positions they're hiring for are generally entry level, but the company is hiring tenured people to fill them. It means the company has a horrible training program. We're going to have a ragtag team of incompetent coworkers. Number 2, if the interview consists solely of, tell me about a time you, behavioral questions, run. If a company is looking for excellence, they'll add in technical questions. See above for the reason. Number 3, if early on in the interviewer goes from interviewer mode to promoter role, trying to convince you to take the job even before it's offered, see number 1 for the reason. Number 4, honestly, this is solely my own observation and it'll sound far out there, but based on my observations it has played out, get there early and visit the bathrooms. You don't have to go in, just find a seating area not too far from the restrooms and observe the passersby going to and from the bathrooms. If most people are simply going in and out for number 1s, you're cool. If you notice that most folks are going in and taking forever, you're looking at a stressful workplace. Number 4, or they just had a really bad lunch. But yeah, if I hated my job, I'd be in the can for a number of reasons. Story 9. I had a weird interview years ago. I was applying to be a trade sales assistant as the job details and duties seemed to match what I was already doing at my temp job at the time. The office didn't feel like an office. It looked like only interviewers were there and a receptionist that was extremely quiet and never looked at anyone. You didn't see other workers or things going on, which I thought was strange. Red flag number 1. It didn't feel like an office, especially since I've worked in a few. They have a certain way they're set up to be appealing to clients, but also people running about busy and talking. I saw none of that. It didn't feel professional. I've worked in startups, but even then they had this feeling of people working and being productive. I was in an interview with a woman and she asked me 1 or 2 questions, then suddenly went into this huge pitch and I couldn't understand anything she said because she was talking super fast. I picked up words like, soon you'll be a manager before you know it, and stuff like that. In my eyes, when you talk so fast about something like this, a pitch or important details, they're hoping to miss something. My mental alarm bells went off after that. I didn't hear a single thing about my role as a trade assistant. You know, the person they apparently needed for their company? Red flag. I knew that since my job description never came up once, they were not actually looking for what they claimed online. I said thank you and left. Within 2 hours, I got an email that I'm good for the job somehow and I needed to come in again Friday that week. I sent them an email saying I must decline as I was no longer interested in the position. Never heard back from them again. When I checked Glassdoor and a few other sites, I realized this company has a habit of bringing people in with these job positions in LinkedIn, but in reality, according to the claims, they were taking prospective employees in the street to do commission-only based sales. Like wearing a uniform and standing outside to hand out flyers, no matter what you applied for. Even if you applied as a receptionist, you did this. I reported them on LinkedIn right away as they were lying about these positions. So yeah, the red flags were how they seemed to be holding back info when I was there, and I had a gut feeling something was wrong, not to mention the interviewer was giving off warning signs. Story 10. Had a job interview at a game studio. Wasn't a dream job or anything, but my company was having troubles and I was sure I was going to lose my job soon, so I started looking for work. The whole interview was conducted by their managing director, who was no developer and had no real knowledge of game design, with their lead game designer sitting there as well, but not really saying much. In all my life, I had never had a more awkward interview. The guy was actively trying to make me feel insecure, and it was clear that he was immensely pleased with himself when he managed to unsettle me. We proceeded to talk about salary, and he told me to name my price, but that I should know that he has a maximum salary and that if I asked for more, I wouldn't get the job, because he doesn't haggle. The smug little booger then proceeded to beam at me across the desk, and you could see that he was super proud of himself. Didn't get the job, but some friends of mine ended up working there. Turns out the guy was a supreme a-hole who was also very incompetent. Who would have thought that someone who thinks the best way to lead a job interview is to bully the applicant would turn out to be a massive a-hole and really bad boss? Should have made a video game about him. Looks intimidating, but is actually easy mode and difficulty. Story 11. I work in dentistry. Here's some red flag situations I've experienced. Number 1, my first job after graduating from college and getting my license. The dentist hired me, and on my first day said, "Since you're new at this, we're going to pay you at an assistant salary until you prove yourself." I'm a registered dental hygienist. Number 2, dental office personnel told me that nobody took breaks or even stopped for lunch because everyone in the office decided years ago that they would rather work through lunch and get out earlier, which never happened. Number 3, office personnel referred to patients by the cost of their treatment plans, i.e. instead of Mrs. So-and-so is coming in today, it would be, that $10,000 treatment plan is coming in today. Number 4, I was asked to take a Scantron-type personality test during an initial interview to see if I was a good fit for the office. This goes hand in hand with the dental offices that, for some reason, use Scientology principles to run the office. Number 5, asked if I could do a working interview. Never agreed to this. It's the dentist's way of getting free work. Meanwhile, you're unprotected as a non-employee. It's inappropriate to work on patients that aren't your patients. Number 6, arrived at an interview only to find out it was a group interview. We had to watch a 10-minute PowerPoint about the dentist, then take a quiz about his life. Number 7, been interviewed by an office manager or offered a job without ever meeting a dentist. Who are you really answering to in the office? Who's responsible for the patients? I love what I do, but I've worked for some seriously shady people. Of course, the best guy I worked for had the nerve to retire. Story 12. When the interviewer is actively telling you how much the job sucks. The manager of the Domino's who was interviewing looked like she was ready to cry during the whole thing. I knew right then and there I wasn't going to be there long. She informed me during the interview that it's just like high school here, aka people were immature and nobody was getting 30 hours because then upper management would have to give them benefits. I got the job and she quit on my second day. I hadn't even been trained and my only shifts were during the afternoon rush during the height of the pandemic. 4 out of 5 of the people who were there when I first started working there either quit or were let go over the course of about 3 months. My paycheck was late several times. One of our drivers was regularly allowed to sit in the back room folding boxes for an hour during the rush because he had to charge his ankle monitor. Essentially, he wasn't doing his job when we needed all the drivers we could get. And to top it all off, I got fired for getting close to 30 hours. They claimed it was because I'd had multiple warnings about my performance even though I'd never heard any complaints or comments or anything about how well I was doing. I was on time every day and was responsible for training everyone who came after me until I got let go. Again, some guy sat in a shift and was fine, but I got let go because I kept asking for more hours. 2 out of 10. Would never work at Domino's again. Damn, that last one rhymed. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.